Dear Montefiore Pinham, you are a 7-month-old sunrise of gummy smiles. You are bald as an egg, thunder and shrieks that are lightning, so excited for bananas, hugs, and our morning walks past the lagoon. Dear Montefiore Pinham, I want to tell you about the lagoon, that lucid, sleepy lagoon lounging against the sunrise. Men say that one day that lagoon will devour you. They say it will gnaw at the shoreline, chew at the roots of your breadfruit trees, gulp down your sidewalk, and crunch your island's shattered bones. They say you, your daughter, your granddaughter too, will wander, rootless, with only a passport to call home. This poem titled Dear Montefiore Pinham was performed by Kathy Gentle-Kendrick before a 2012 UN summit where many members of the audience were rightfully moved to tears. Kathy's poem speaks to and of the material impacts climate change has on particular communities, impacts that are obscured by the legalistic heuristic deployed by the affirmative. It is powerful because it speaks to the severity of climate change, a severity that drowns homes and makes refugees of entire nations. This severity creates an obligation for those developed nations who have and continue to contribute to global emissions to do anything in their power to reduce the impact of climate change. The qualifier of obligation in the resolution removes the need to consider reasonability for developed states, and the severity of material impacts on developing states requires an attunement to their needs. My opponent's framework of differentiated responsibility places an onus upon developing nations to correct an environmental problem that they themselves had little to no part in constructing. We should ask ourselves, what is the Marshall Islands' ethical responsibility for their island being drowned? In moving forward in the attempt to reduce climate change, the global community should attune itself to the needs and responsibilities of developing nations by implementing a developmental rights framework. This argument rests on two contentions. The first is necessary development. The affirmative makes a preemptory response to the notion that developing nations together comprise 50% of global emissions. However, in the instance of China, the largest developing nation, which harbors 21% of the world's population, has a relatively low per capita emission. Much of China's emission goes towards subsistence emissions or survival emissions that are necessary for development, an increase in basic rights and quality of life. In China, 20 million people live in rural communities and over 22 million urban residents live in poverty. The emissions of China go towards improving these conditions. A development rights framework would accommodate these emissions while also restricting luxury emissions, or emissions that go towards the production of luxury goods. My opponent makes an astute distinction in her reference to climate change as a global problem that necessitates a global solution, but the onus should be on developed countries to provide that solution. Industrialization is inevitable, but the knowledge and technology that would allow for developed states to mitigate the impact of their development on global climate change should be created by developed nations. This is distinct from differentiated responsibility because it does not necessitate that developing nations create the technologies and practices, only that they implement them. The second contention is a contestation of the notion of a differentiated responsibility based on historic contribution to warming. The assertion of a historic contribution raises many questions that problematize the efficacy of my opponent's argument. From when should history begin? Should the agriculture, forestry, and other land use and non-CO2 gases be included? Should the embedded emissions in trade be accounted for? Should countries be assigned responsibilities for emissions before 1990? Given that different nations began their process of globalization at different periods in history, it would be impossible to create a global framework that is based on historic contributions because the globalization that contributes to warming did not happen at the same point in history.
Yeah.